Hello and welcome to another episode of Tea and Total War. I'm Cody Bonds, your host. Medieval Kingdoms iOS just came out, which is probably the best expansion ever made to a video game, which is a term I haven't used in about 20 years. But it was 4 unique, interesting campaigns, and if you're an old fart like me, you cannot be more excited to see them on your phone again and play with them while you're on the toilet. And I'm here today not with the Creative Assembly, but with Feral Interactive, who is actually in charge of porting this over to iOS and Android devices, and they were also in charge for the recent Rome Remastered. So it's a real pleasure to speak with them and talk about the process of actually bringing this stuff to you on your mobile devices. Can you guys introduce yourselves?
Sure. So my name is Edwin Smith. I head up the design department at Feral and worked on sort of all of the mobile games, but sort of a little bit more on probably the Rome mobile game than Med.
Benedict Parker. I was, I guess, how would we phrase it, the design guy for Med 2.
Yeah, I'd say the lead designer.
What were the difficulties you guys ran into? Because, I mean, I've played it on iOS. I was shocked, even on a tiny iPhone 12, how much control I had, like, you know, the new intuitive ways of moving around the map. Like, what was the biggest challenges of adapting this PC game to mobile device?
The genesis of this game came from Rome Mobile. So it all started out where we had an iPad and we thought we could bring Rome to iPad. That would work really well. So about 5 years ago, we went and worked out how to do 3D battle controls and everything on an iPad. It then evolved to, well, if we can get it to work on an iPad, maybe we can get it to work on a phone. So we sat down, worked out how to redesign things to fit on a more compact thing. So you ended up with sort of the iPad and the iPhone version being sort of different iterations of the same idea. And then with Medieval, we kind of took all of the millions of hours of gameplay people have had on all of those games, all of the reviews, and had kind of a clean slate to what can we do better. We already know that it's like loads of people are playing. It's got an average of like 4.5 or 4.6. So it's well loved, the Rome games, but we know where we could improve it. And that's where sort of Benedict came in, where we had a big list of things and we kind of focused on things like battles and some of the UI bits.
Yeah. Like, for instance, one of the things I knew I wanted to do was to try and harmonize that iPad, iPhone split so that you have basically like 95% the same UI on both, just with slightly different proportions. It's just a lot easier to work when you have, you know, you can everything more or less lining up together, and it's just a question of scaling. And it gives you more time to focus on other things, like, for instance, the 3D battles, where I knew there were some things I wanted to improve in terms of like reliability of being able to execute your commands, stuff that I found that I couldn't quite execute as quickly as I wanted to at speed. I just wanted to take a whole step back and reevaluate how to do them. And that's when new stuff like the formation mode came in, which seems to have been a fair hit with the users. Like, we have analytics for a lot of the different control stuff we added, and we see that most of the things we've done, people have generally taken on board and started working with.
And I'll admit that as a Scotland player, I do like the playing with the phone, because I just set my army and then don't move. I don't have to touch it. Just pan my camera around a little bit. It doesn't require me to like super duper get in there and try and micromanage. And that is definitely an active choice on my part. There is one new UI element that I saw when I was playing Medieval 2 Base, and I'm not sure if it made it into Kingdoms or not, but you guys had a map that came up that seemed to detail each pixel grid and the resources that were happening on the map. And I was like, oh, that's a cool resource.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it was sort of just a bit of fun. We kind of realized we could do it, and we thought, well, you know, some things are just nice to add because they'll look good in the marketing screenies. They'll have the kind of, oh, they've added a fun little thing. But actually, when we started playing around with the feature a bit more, we found it did have some practical applications. Like, for instance, you know, when you have like a fairly large region with a bunch of trade resources, it's not always easy to see at a glance like exactly what is everywhere. But having a nice little summary screen that shows you, oh, actually, this region contains blah, blah, and 3 lots of blah, turned out to be more convenient than we thought.
It's a very simple, clean visual representation of what's going on right there. So the one thing that I've been most impressed by, at least playing on my phone, is that how quickly and easily the game scales to your device. Like, I'm so used to having to go in on PC games and minutia tick down to try and get that good frame rate in there. But no, the game just sort of automatically scaled to what it felt was best. How did you guys go about adapting that stuff to the various levels of hardware? Because I mean, there's a huge disparity right there.
A massive credit goes to both our QA teams and the developers. So we actually have a system where we will have a look at the chipset that you are running on, and every single different device chipset has a tailored set of settings that QA will have gone through and tested. So for all of the devices where we list the devices actually supported, so for iOS, it's everything that you can install it on, and on Android, there's probably a list of like 50 or 60 devices. All of those, we've actually sat down and play tested them to ensure they have stable frame rate, and we are pushing the graphics to the maximum possible without overheating. So it's all kind of a lot of testing. For the ones, Android phones that we don't know or don't have, we look at the chipset and then it selects what we know is a safe setting. So what we've learned with mobile is people obviously want to turn everything up to the max, but on a phone it'll just crash and then they won't be able to restart it or change their settings, and people get stuck with something that isn't optimal. So we've done our hardest to make sure that basically we're always pushing the most your phone can do. One of the really cool things our engineering team did over a decade ago now was they made it so these settings can be updated from our server on launch. So when a new iPhone comes out or a new Google Pixel phone comes out, we put new settings on the server and your game will automatically update and change its graphic settings to take advantage of what your new phone can do.
Hardware improvements.
So it's really good for like the new iPhone because we can just put the settings out and go, yep, we can actually turn up the units by 1 or whatever. I mean, in general, Med 2 on at least like the iPads, like the iPad Pro and things like that, you're already running at like pretty much maxed out PC settings with the same textures as the original PC. The only real graphical difference is we're running like HD UI. So we repainted every single UI element, all of the unit cards, all of the backgrounds, anything that is not like in-game engine has all been repainted or upscaled and retouched. There's nothing original there because the original textures, I think you'd say if you load it on the PC, the original game, like in the 3D battle, has held up amazingly well. But the UI and the font rendering, the font's a little bit blurry because of how they rendered fonts back then, and the buttons are all a little bit sort of blurry because they were used to running at a lower res. So we kind of focused on that. So it's basically making sure that all of the buttons are very close to the original. Most people will be like, oh, it's how I remembered it. But if you go back and have a look, we're running about 4 times the resolution of the original buttons, sometimes slightly higher. And that's why on a phone with a super high resolution screen, you really need that, crispness to make it feel right.
And on that subject of feel, one of the other things we wanted to make sure that we could do for Roam Mobile, Med 2 Mobile, which we didn't quite do with Roam, is we wanted to get more of like the textured menu backgrounds and whatnot that you have in Med 2 desktop, where you have like scrolls, not just menus to display information, but wax seals and things, which we were able to do because one of the things we knew we wanted to sort out was just kind of optimizing like the menu sort of creation logic at the start of the project, so we could make sure that things would scale correctly and stretch and not blur or kind of cut off when it comes to doing menu backgrounding and details, so that we could have those more, because the medieval period was very decorative, so we wanted to make sure that our UI matched that style.
Yeah, getting that context and feel. So I will admit, the first time I turned the game on my phone and the main menu music wafted over me, like so much nostalgia hit. I was like, oh yes, I'll be here for some time. As a segue from that, I mean, a lot of the work you guys did on UI elements and things like that also got rolled into the Roam Remastered campaign. Going back in and really updating it to be playable on modern systems. I know I tried to go back and play the original, and it was just like squished and moved and squashed. And I was like, man, this is entirely unpleasant to try and operate around. So, I mean, what was the mindset of trying to adapt something like that and, I guess, freshen it for a modern audience?
To be honest, it's a very, very hard balance because essentially, as a bit of context, I played Roam when it first came out. Mm-hmm. I then worked about just over 10 years ago on making it available for Mac. I've modded it. I then worked on the iPad. So I worked on all of the different iterations of it. And I think the hard thing is you have the nostalgia of how you remember your first experience was. So you're trying to make sure that you keep the feeling of nostalgia, but you also need to make sure that you remove all of the jarring elements that make people go, oh, I don't remember, like, as you were talking about, like, bits of, like, the UI doesn't fit widescreen, so it just stretches to fit. So all of the circular buttons are slightly oval. Like, you don't remember any of that in your head. I mean, my favorite one was, I remember the first time I played Final Fantasy, and I thought the cutscenes were like cinema level quality. And I came back about 5 years ago and played it on my phone. And I was like, wow, like, you can see the triangles, but like your brain plays tricks. So I think with a remaster, you need to keep all of the love and the charm of the original, but fix and update the areas that you think people will notice. And it's kind of a little bit of a guessing game, and it's sort of, you will never please everyone. So it's trying to make sure that once all of the sort of initial sort of everyone posting and everyone talking about it, sort of over time, do people sort of keep on enjoy it, and does it sort of last, and people want to keep on playing it. So like with Rome Remastered, I think the key thing is the original game, people kept playing it for 16 years. Will Rome Remastered give Rome another 16 years worth of fun? So it was mostly like thinking about things of like, we should make sure that the UI and the resolution scaling runs at 4K, because in 10 years time, 4K is probably going to be standard. We should make sure that it's 64-bit compliant so that it has nice long time. So there's lots of little things that you don't really think about when you're playing the game, but you need to go through and make sure that everything is kind of done. So it was going through, finding the things most people sort of complained about. Can we improve those without losing the essence of the original game? Because if you change too many things, it's no longer Rome, and it's Rome Remastered, not Rome 3 or Rome 1.5 or whatever. So it's that kind of real tricky balancing act. So yeah, it was fun, very challenging, but like I think especially with sort of seeing what the mods and what people are doing with it now a year or so after release is really quite fun to see. Sort of, I think someone's made a map now with I think Imperium Surrectum's got like 900 and something settlements in, and the map is something like 20 times bigger than the original map in the base game. And it's just fantastic, that volume of work that these different modders can do. And sort of, I hope that sort of will help build a legacy of loads of really cool mods and replayability for many years to come.
And I want to make sure to jump in right now and say that this is not something that was possible in the base game. Like, you guys had to go back in, and my understanding is to the code level, to remove a lot of these restrictions on the number of settlements, the number of regions, the number of factions, 64-bit. Like, this is not stuff that's like you turn off a switch inside the game. Like, it required a very deep level changes.
The key thing I think we managed to do sort of in the patches and the updates was to help foster the modability of it, just like the original game. So the great thing, and I think why Rome and Med and some of these classic games have lasted so long, is people sit there and modify them, and then you suddenly get an extra 100 hours of gameplay because somebody's made this really cool mod that you like. So we wanted to make sure that sort of we paid respect to that side of the game as well, which I think there's been some really cool mods coming out there, and it definitely is fun inside the office when we go and see, like, wow, someone must have spent 1,000 hours making this slightly crazy zany mod, but there's all these people having fun in a way that you never would have thought. And
also, it kind of plays to the strength of Rome compared with later Total War titles. Like, we weren't trying to make another Rome 2, backporting any kind of fancy stuff that was there. So what you want to do is understand, what are the good bits of Rome, and then expand them out. And one of the aspects of Rome is like, settlement management isn't super complicated, so that it's actually quite reasonable to ask the player to have like 30, 40 settlements to keep under their control. So that kind of super massive map approach, as supported by the mods, actually kind of fits the play style and the experience of that engine and that kind of set of gameplay mechanics.
I definitely have always liked that particular building style. As you said, it feels a lot more intimate. You can craft the settlements to the way you want them to look, and it was nice to go back to that style again. As you said, it's sort of like different flavors of ice cream in a way. It's all ice cream, but it's like, oh, it's quite fun here. So my fans are going to make sure that I ask you this, and I realize that you guys are under NDAs, but I have to still ask the question. So how is Medieval 2 Remastered coming along?
Well, it's on the Apple Watch. It's coming out tomorrow. Google Glass as well.
No, I mean, in sort of all seriousness, we're kind of focused on, Kingdoms has only been out less than a week. We're kind of focused on that at the moment. We've pretty much everyone has answered this question multiple times. The answer hasn't sort of changed since then. We don't have any current plans to do a remastered version of Med 2. But yeah, we're well aware there's been a few people requesting or thinking it's a good idea.
One or two.
Yeah, one or two.
Oh man. So I mean, are there any big changes to Kingdoms? Any kind of unit changes, design changes to the iOS version or the Android version, the mobile version?
There's a whole list of things that we added for the mobile version that are also in the base game. Mm-hmm. But I think the big one that we added as part of the Kingdoms patch is a settlement viewer. Mm-hmm. So you can now view settlements again, just like original Rome. So that's a new mobile-only feature.
That's cool.
So we added it back in and added in some additional models so that you have kind of peasants walking around and all of that stuff, just like mm-hmm. the original. So that you can access from the settlement list. Mm-hmm. There are a few factions that we've turned on that weren't originally playable in a couple of the Kingdoms ones.
Yeah, because we were looking at the 4 campaigns. We kind of noticed that it was the case that almost all of the factions that kind of start on the campaign map in the various campaigns were playable, mm-hmm. except for 2, which were the Mongols and the Norwegians in the Teutonic campaign. And so we kind of looked at that and thought, you know what, for consistency, let's just make them available as well. Because there aren't any ways to play as the Mongols in the base game, because they kind of arrive 100 turns in, and enabling that wasn't a super easy task. Mm-hmm. But they started on the map in Teutonic, so we're there'll be people who want to play as the Mongols, let's get that in for them. And so we kind of enabled them. We made a few small balance tweaks so they're kind of playable, not excessively strong, but mm-hmm. they have a niche within the campaign. And then put them in, and people seem to be playing them.
Funnily enough, it's hard for Benedict and I to remember what we've added, because sort of by the time the game ships, we've probably been thinking of these new ideas for about a year, maybe 18 months in the back of our heads. So you only remember that it's new when you go back and play the original PC game. You're like, oh yeah, it doesn't have feature X. So a couple of things one thing we added back in for Kingdoms was renaming settlements. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a UI element for it in the original release. We found a way of putting it in without getting in the way. Mm-hmm. So again, if you go to the settlement lists, there's the viewer and the rename feature there. We rejigged the guild UI. I think Benedict mostly did that just to make it easier.
Say rejig to an extent. There isn't really a lot of guild UI full stop in the desktop experience, mm-hmm. but you get a couple of notifications saying you've got a new guild available.
Yeah.
But the underlying system behind that was never really fully surfaced to the player. And speaking for myself, at least, I never really had a good grasp of it until I looked up some online guides for how that works. But on the mobile platform, you don't tend to find people looking up online guides as much. So I wanted to make sure that as much as possible, and this wasn't just for guilds, it's a general policy, our explanations of game mechanics were good. We gave people the relevant information. So one of the things we added was a system for properly tracking guild interest and guild offers for any given settlement on your campaign. So you can go to London, say, and you say, okay, these 3 people are actively making the offers. These other guys are kind of developing their interest, mm-hmm. and then plan your actions accordingly.
As I used to have to spam archers until I would get the Woodsman's Guild as England back in the day, trying to get the that guild to pop up, and I was never quite sure exactly what was the interaction. So And that's what I'm most impressed about is, I mean, you gentlemen are going back and taking a game years old now and trying to reinvigorate it and, taking that loving care to craft it into something that people can enjoy and looking at what was a good experience and what frankly needed to be honestly looked at again.
We obviously did small things like this summary screens and things like that, so it's easy to tell what's going on. But the real big one for me, because of probably how I play, is the load save system. I don't know if you've noticed, but on mobile, we track your progress per campaign. So if you go into the load and save menu, it says your England campaign, and then inside there, it's got all your saves linked to that campaign. So if you've got multiple campaigns on the go, you don't need to scroll through the big list and work out, was that the one I was playing or the other one? Because it groups everything. So you can easily go in and go, this is your England campaign 1, and here are all of your saves with your turns. Here's the second campaign you were playing. This is the date and everything else. So getting all of that there, and if you have an iPad and iPhone like me, synchronizing between the two of them, making all of that pop up. So when I load it on my phone, it was just like, the last game you played was on your iPad yesterday. Do you want to sync? And you go, yes. And then it pops up. That information just kind of, for me, it's like kind of it was like a real game changer, because on the desktop game sort of years ago and even now, I have like a save game folder with like 120 odd saves, and I'm just like, where was I again?
You learned how to organize your naming structure very quickly.
So that just kind of automated, like helped clean that kind of process up, and it was kind of quite good. There was a few little things we've done for Kingdoms, because Kingdoms needs a launcher. So when you first drop into the game, once you've installed Kingdoms, you get the which game do you want to pick. And we were like, but we don't want to slow people down getting into the game. So we added this, again, it's the small little things that I kind of get the most joy from, is if you hold your finger on the play button, it will automatically load your last campaign, skip the main menu, and drop you straight into your campaign. Those little things, I think, are... none of them will change the world, but if you put loads of them in, it's kind of like a lot of our design philosophy is, what are the little things that you like in a game that make you think, oh, that's nice? Like, we tend to, whenever I play a game which isn't sort of something we're working on, and I see something like that, I note it down and be like, it'd be really nice if we just added this little thing, because it makes your life easier. So I think that's kind of like what Benedict's philosophy, when he was talking earlier about what little areas have got could we improve? Because I mean, Med 2 is a fantastic game. It's one of the best strategy games of all time. So you have to treat it, with respect, but equally, there's always a few little things that over the 10 or so years we can improve, and it's like, how do we do that?
Again, that's kind of understanding what's like core versus just as a circumstantial thing that happened to be the case of the game, and like understanding like why people like the game and trying to play to that, I think. Which I think one of the advantages I had coming into this project is, for various reasons, I had a lot of time to get really familiar with the game, put in that play time of just as an end user, playing through campaigns again and again and again, just to get a proper feel for the title. So I could try and tackle the problems that come up with that perspective of being a relatively experienced user. Because that's always useful when you have the kind of experience to see, in my given play session, are there things I'm doing over and over and over again that aren't tremendously efficient? Often it's like you're looking around for information that could be presented clearer in a menu, but because it's not there, you're having to like dig through menus and go back and forth, stuff like that. I find I can best tackle when I get 100, 200 hours on a given title, which also means I can play video games for my job, and he can't do anything about it.
You find those areas where you're clicking and you're like, oh, I'm wasting time, or you're just trying to remove those barriers to gameplay, making sure people get back to the fun stuff they want to do faster, so they're more likely to keep playing.
I probably spent with one of our other designers a best part of a month thinking about the end turn mechanics on the original Rome mobile, which is part of what went into the mechanics for Med 2. And by end turn mechanics, I mean, before you hit end turn, you rotate through all your settlements, check that you've got the right recruitment going on and everything. And it was like, you don't want to have to go find the settlement, go in, close the menu, go to the next one, open it. So it's like, how do we on a phone UI make sure that you can go next, yep. That's all done, go next. And it's just all the little things. I mean, I had quite a few debates with Benedict of, well, if we move this button here, and he was like, no, but like when I'm doing enter, you always do this loop quite a lot. So we should make sure that it's easy to hit on a phone so that you can instantly do it. Because on a desktop, I guess people are more committed to sitting down and having a long session. Whereas on a phone, you might need to quickly finish your turn before you need to jump off the bus or the train or whatever. So making sure that we can make it so you feel like you're spending all of your time having the fun, making the decisions, but anything that isn't really decision making and is just more kind of grinding, how do we optimize that to make it simple? So you can, you know what the question is, you have the data, you make the answer, as opposed to, I have a question, I now need to spend a couple of minutes finding the data, then answer it. So it's a tricky thing to do with such a tiny screen. So it's like, what information do we need to do? So I mean,
or you're in a situation and you're not quite sure what the question is because bits of information haven't been phrased to you correctly.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess I don't know how interesting it is for people listening, but it's mostly like what we tend to do is watch people talk about the game or leave a review, and they've got a frustration point or something, and we're thinking, what was your thought process to get to there, and how can you change something so that you never get to the point where you're frustrated? So like a lot of watching people play is, they made a mistake at point 2 and they get frustrated at point 4, so you need to change the UI at point 2 so they never get to 4. So it's kind of a backwards puzzle.
Talking of which, we changed something actually because of me watching your playthrough / review of Med.
God. What was, I'm sure I was acting like a Muppet because I was actually in a library with my kids filming part of that. And I just have mentioned this before we go, because I do want to hear what you changed. The way you mention how people engage with the phone version is different than the PC. And it like lightning hits me, because you're right. I would pull it up. I would spend 2-3 minutes, like instead of checking email or something, I would do a turn, then I'd put it back in my pocket and come back to it later. It wasn't a continuous session. So please, yes. What did you change based on my Muppetness?
I remember your video was, you kind of played through the tutorial section. And one of the bits in the tutorial is you've got a bunch of soldiers and you're kind of drawing them out into a group formation.
Yeah, that was...
And in Med, there are kind of 2 ways of doing that. Mm-hmm. One which we inherited from Rome Mobile, and one which was kind of the new approach. The Rome Mobile one was like a 2-finger drag gesture. Put 2 fingers on the screen, having selected your troops, and then draw them out into a line, which kind of works fairly well for if you just want to very quickly execute a gesture. But we found that it wasn't always perfect for giving you like the fine detailed control of, I want my line to start here, I want to end here, and I want it to be 3 ranks deep, that kind of thing. So we added kind of a new positioning mode where you kind of tap and hold the unit, it brings up a positioning box, and you kind of draw and arrange that box to be kind of more convenient. And the way we envisioned it is like people would do the 2-finger drag for kind of the quick execution, and they do the positioning box for the more precise performance. But what we actually found was that people mostly just use the positioning mode. They didn't actually need the speed as much as we thought. And when we watched through your video, we found that you were kind of in that tutorial step, maybe struggling a little with the 2-finger quick drawing process, which requires a bit more dexterity, because we hadn't, in that tutorial process, sort of prioritized the slower but much easier, more precise positioning mode. So we're looking at it, and you were kind of struggling a bit and going, why don't we just make the easier one, the one that we teach first? And so in the patch we put out kind of not too long after first release, that step in the tutorial got changed.
Context for that particular movement. I have the shortest, chubbiest fingers of anyone I know. And trying to put these 2 together just turns into one big fat blob whenever I touch a screen. So perhaps using me as the metric is not the best right there, but I do appreciate, apparently I am a sample size of one for you guys to draw upon. So, all All right, gentlemen, this has been a lot of fun. And by the way, never feel afraid to get into really deep developer answers. What I find for this series is actually a lot of other developers watch it. And so they enjoy seeing people do the deep dives just like they do. They like hearing, the nitty gritty of it. And it's always tremendously fun for me because, there's just so many stories and so many hours that have to go into making games like this that people just don't appreciate unless they hear you guys talk about it. So thank you so much for taking the time to do so.
The only other thing I figured I'd mention that I forgot we didn't mention earlier was the two things that we added in or tweaked for Med 2 that I hadn't mentioned was set faction leader is now a thing, which was only in Rome but wasn't in Med. And then we were setting capital, which I think we just moved the button or something.
Oh, that was another one where it was like we kind of wanted to surface the information a bit better.
That was it. Yeah. You can explain.
Because like the whole capital system where you have those penalties to like corruption and distance to capital. We thought it would be good to actually surface to people like how these penalties scaled as the distance increases, and therefore like where's a good place to put your capital. So we bunged in like a move capital menu that showed if I moved my capital to here, like how is that going to affect my public order and income of all my other settlements? And then it like sums up the benefits and detriments together into like one kind of tabulated view. So basically you can go, oh wait, if I move it here, I can make like an extra 2,000 a turn for basically doing nothing, and these settlements will get better, and these ones should be still fine.
So like trade systems, it's another mechanic that was in there that people were interacting with, but the information behind it was sort of hidden. So it's finding a way to bring it forward to the player.
Yeah, I mean, the game was amazing at having so many intricately clever mechanics, but a few of them, especially now that people don't read a 100-page manual when they get a game. I mean,
it's not included anymore. You can't get a manual with the games.
You had the manual, and you read the manual when you were going home from the store, like in the back seat of the car. You'd read the manual. You'd then read the manual while it was installing, so you knew everything, and then you'd play, and you'd have a manual. Whereas like now on a phone, it's like manual. Like you just need to. I want to know. Like learn by doing is the way modern games work.
As you've been playing for some time and you mentioned the manuals in the backseat of the car right there, I'm going to one-up you even further because this happened to me recently. The smell of a new video game, right? When you crack open that box right there, because it's one of those things, we buy most things digital now, and I bought my son a video game recently, an actual physical copy, and he was like, I was like, yes, that smell. It's like new car smell.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember physical way back when one year we shipped everything out. And I remember picking up. We had the new stock freshly made and wrapped, and then it went straight out the door. And some of the actual packaging was warm when it came into the office from the delivery because it had just come off the manufacturing racks. And I remember having that smell. It had the new smell, but like seems that it had just come from the factory. That new smell was like super strong, and it just felt like 1,000 new games in a big pile. It was just like, I was like, wow, it's like everyone's Christmases is sat on this desk about to be shipped out via, different shipping things, and just looking at them was, it's kind of something you miss these days of like a physical is less and less of a thing.
But having said about Christmas, the holidays are coming up right now, and if you don't know what to get someone, Medieval 2 on their phone is a pretty good gift, to be honest. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to turn it down. So, I think hopefully you guys are going to make a lot of people happy over this holiday season. Thank you both so much for sitting down to take some time to talk with me.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to give a big thank you to the guys over at Feral Interactive. I've been a big fan of their work for some time now, and this was the perfect excuse to get a chance to interview them. And I also want to make a big thank you to the patrons who make videos like this possible. Thank you to them, and thank you to all of you who watch this video. Have a great day out there.